Everyone. I hope you're all doing well this morning, afternoon, evening. I wonder how many time zones we have in the class. So today we will be talking about arrays and for loops. Jordan's going to be doing the lecture this morning. And then I noticed in the survey yesterday, some people wanting to do a little bit of review of events or confusion about events or topics about jQuery events that we just didn't cover yesterday that maybe they'd like me to talk about. So I think at the end of class, I'm going to post the Zoom link for wrap up about 20 minutes before the end of class. And if you want to do a little bit of review or have questions about how event listeners and handlers work, then you can join us when I post that. And if you don't want to do that, then you can keep working, and I'll probably message the channel in about 5 minutes before class ends, just to have our usual quick wrap up after I answer questions about events. But you'll also get some more experience playing with them today and tomorrow. You're actually going to be using jQuery events as you learn about arrays today and about objects tomorrow. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Jordan.
Let me go and share my screen here. All right, good morning, everyone. Okay, let's make sure we get this set up here. I want to share it. I don't know why I'm doing that. Okay. All right, so today we are going to talk about arrays. You guys have probably seen those pop up a few times. I know some people have sort of asked questions about it. So today we will remove the mystery and you'll have a good understanding of how arrays work. So we'll start off by kind of going over what an array is. So arrays are a collection of elements. They are list-like objects. So what does that mean specifically? So here you can see an example. We've got a list of elements between the brackets. And those elements could be any value type from JavaScript. So we've got a number, a string, and we've got another array in there, and then the number 4. And then it has a length property. So if we say myArray.length, we can see there are 5 elements in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's kind of what we expected. However, if you were to look up what the list of data types are for JavaScript, you would not see array listed there. Because, well, let's see, it's not quite here yet, but essentially an array is a special type of object. However, whenever you're talking about arrays, we just generally talk about them as arrays. We're not saying special type of object as we go. And you'll get a little bit more of an intuitive sense of how that works as we proceed today. So if you want to access an element from an array, you just type out the name of the array. You insert brackets here, and then you're going to insert the element that you want to get. And one thing that's a little bit tricky about arrays is that they're index-based, meaning that it's going to start off at 0 and then increase from there. So if we want to access the first element in the array, we're going to do message array 0, and that would give us 1. If we did message array 3, we go 0, 1, 2, 3, and that's actually going to give us 7. And I'll kind of show you guys exactly how that looks. Let me switch it up. Okay, so here we've got an array set up that's empty. We'll put some values in there. We'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it's nice and easy. And then if we want to access that first element, we're going to do array, and then we'll put in 0 for the first element. And then if we run that, we can see here that we've got 1, which is the first value. If we wanted to get the third value in here, we would do array 2, because it's 0, 1, 2. Then that will give us 3. Does anyone have any questions about kind of how that index works with arrays and then accessing the properties at this point. Okay, perfect. And you guys will get a little bit more experience working with these as we go. So if it's something that's a little bit foreign to you right now, don't worry about it. We will be covering that at length, and you'll get a lot of exercise with it today as well. So you can assign values to arrays as well. So you could simply insert them the way that I had done when I initialized the array. I said variable array equals the brackets, and then I just put the numbers in there. You can also say like message array 0 and then put the value that you would want to assign there, kind of like we've got this example down there. And then there are various methods that will allow us to assign arrays. So we're going to go over those a little bit more later on, kind of what those methods are, and even what a method is. But we'll just kind of demonstrate that simple assignment here to get started. Okay, so right now we can see we've got our array set up, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we had initially said that array 2 is going to equal 3. But here, if we say array 2 is going to equal hello everyone, we're assigning it a new value here. And then if we go to run that, we now see that it is in fact hello everyone. So that's just how that's one way that you can assign the values. This isn't a way that you'll use very commonly, but when you're actually doing programs, but it is something that you need to be familiar with, and it is something that you'll be using throughout the exercises today. Oh, I lost I think I closed out my presentation there. Fun. Oh, here it is. I found it. It's a little tedious switching between these, so I apologize for the delay. As I had mentioned before, an array is in fact an object. So if we were to run type of my array, we would in fact get that it's an object. So if we just ran a regular object as well, it would also return object. So it's not going to allow us to differentiate whether or not it's an object just using type of versus an array. However, there is an array, a method available to us. So if you type array.isArray and then input the array here that you want to test, it will tell you if it's in fact an array or not. We'll show that in action a little bit later on. Additionally, arrays and strings are not the same, but they do share some properties. So say that you set up a string here, like you would before, so just putting it between quotes and then putting the words in there that you want. You can access the specific values of that string using index spacing. So my string 1 is going to give you the letter that's at that 1 index. So in this case, that's E. There are a couple other similarities. Strings do have length properties, just like arrays have length properties. So if you want to find out how many letters are in the string, you can just do mystring.length. So that's something that you want to be aware of. They're not the same, but there are some similarities as far as that index space counting goes. So now we're going to kind of dive into a lot of those methods that are available to us and how they work. We call these mutator methods because they're actually going to change what goes into the array. And mutating meaning that they're actually going to mutate the original array. Excuse me. Okay, so and first off, I want to talk to you a little bit about what one of these methods is and what it actually does. So a little bit later on, you're going to learn about objects. And objects can have properties, which is a simple value. So if you said objects dot color equals red, then that would be a simple property of that. However, objects can also have methods, and a method would in fact be a function that exists on that object. So I told you guys that arrays are special types of objects. Here, those arrays have functions that are available that are going to operate on that array object. So we'll kind of see this in action, but I did want you to sort of have a little bit of an understanding of how that works. And don't worry if that's sort of a little over your head. Once we go over objects, I believe tomorrow, we can kind of revisit that, and I think you'll have a little bit better understanding. So we'll kind of start off by working with our mutation. So we're going to start off with pop. So pop is going to return the last element from the array and actually remove it from the array. So we'll say popped element, and then we'll run array.pop. We're going to invoke that. And then here, we're going to run the array. You can see initially it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then if we run that, we can see now that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, that last element has been removed. It has been mutated, so that original array has been changed. Additionally, pop returns that element that we've removed. So if we run that, we can actually see what that last element was. So it's 5. Sort of something that goes along the lines of pop is push. So push allows us to add an element to the end of the array. So say we wanted to add 6, which makes sense. And then if we see what our array is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Additionally, you can pass in multiple parameters here to push. 5, high. We could pass in another array of different values. And then once we run that, we can see that that's all been added to the end of the array in the order that we specified as well. Are there any questions about how push or pop work? Okay, so if you wanted to pop a different index from the array, we'll kind of go over other methods that can kind of achieve that effect specifically. And you are correct, yeah, that it can only access the last index of the array. Oh, I guess that's Sian telling you guys the answer. So, but there are things that we will be able to show you that can kind of achieve that same effect. So these are only going to work on the last element of the array. So adding to the end. Sort of similar to adding to the end, we have the ability to add or remove from the beginning. So we've got our array set up here again. And now we're going to grab that element from the beginning. So added element. And we're going to do array.shift this time. Oh, I think shift is actually going to remove it. My bad. So if we're going to see what our array looks like now, we've actually removed that first element here. So what's at index 0? And then now our array only has 2, 3, 4, and 5 in it. However, if we console log remove element here, shift also returns that element in case we wanted to use that for something. So we can actually see what that one was. And if we unshift it, so we want to add something to the array at the beginning. So say we wanted to add 0. Using unshift, it's going to insert it at the beginning of the array. We can additionally kind of work like we did before with push. We can add a few different things here if we wanted to do that for whatever reason. Those could also be other values besides numbers. We're just using numbers because it's easy, but you could do strings. Also do another array in here. If we wanted to have other arrays in there for whatever reason, we could continually just nest those down. There's not really any reason to do that for this example, but if we go and check that, we can see that all of that has been added in that order that we had specified to the beginning of the array, and that original array has been modified. Any questions about shift or unshift? Okay, perfect. So they work very similarly to push and pop. It's just the area of the array that it's working on. Shift and unshift are the beginning, push and pop are at the end. So somebody had asked earlier, what if you want to pop a different index from the array? There is something called splicing that you can use in order to do that. So we'll say spliced elements here. So with splicing, what you want to do is specify the element that you want to start at. So we will start at R2, which is the first index. And then we want to specify how many elements we want to remove from the array. So if we specify that we want to remove 2 elements from the array, then we will console log what our array looks like. So as you can see, we started at 2 and removed 2 elements. So we removed 2 and 3. So splicing actually is going to remove those elements, and that can happen at any point in the array. If we look here on splice element, we can also see what those values that we removed were. 2 and 3. So we have access to those. Are there any questions about how splice works? Does splicing only work for numbers that are next to each other? So it is going to splice the elements sequentially. So if you wanted, I think that's kind of what you're asking. So if I wanted to splice things at multiple points throughout the array, say I wanted to grab the 1 and I wanted to grab the 4, only those elements, you'd have to run splice a couple times. So you do spliced element 0, 1. So from that 0 index, we want to remove 1 element. And then we'd also have to later on run splice again. In that scenario, what you'd have to keep track of is that your array has changed. So initially our array had 5 elements, but if we splice it once, then it would then have 4 elements. Sure, we can do a quick run through of how that will work. So we'll do an initial splice here. We're starting off at our 0 index, and we're going to remove the first element. And if we do so here we can see that our first element is gone. And then if we wanted to then remove 4, we can't base it off of what our original array is because our array has changed. So if we try to do it based off of the original array, we just want to remove 1 element. And if we count it off what the original array is, we go 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll start at that 4th index and we'll just remove 1 element. If we were to then look at that, we have not removed the element that we wanted to because our array is actually changed. So we didn't actually remove anything on that second splice because our array length only had 4 elements in it. So we went to that 4th element and we tried to remove 1. And we were actually at the end of the array at that point, so there was nothing to remove. But since we know our array has 4 elements after we run it the first time, we'll start at that 3rd index. If we look here, 1, 2, 3. We'll start here, and then we run it. Oh, did I do something wrong there? Let's see what I did. Oh, I removed the last element, of course. Yeah. Okay, so that's how you would go about removing 2 elements from different points within that array. Does that kind of answer your question, Cynthia? And does anyone else have questions kind of about what we were looking over there? Okay, perfect. And we're going over a lot of these methods right now, so it may be a little overwhelming. You guys are going to be using these a lot, and you'll kind of get a more intuitive sense for how they work as you are sort of implementing them in your own code. Additionally, one other method that we have that's actually going to mutate the array is if we reverse the array. So if we do array.reverse, it's going to work exactly like we expect. We console log the array. We can see now that the elements are in a reversed order. So it's nifty if you need that for various, you know, if you wanted to reverse the elements, that's all you need to do. So now we're going to go on to some other methods that do not, in fact, mutate the original array. So we're going to start off with concatenation. So array.concat. So concating is when we just are going to combine two arrays together. So we'll need to have a second array here. Array2. Give it some values. Just give it a couple. Give it a 6, 7, also a string. And if we want to concat these together, we will need to give it a value, and we'll set up a variable. Cat array, we'll do array concat, and then we'll pass in what we want to concatenate it with. And then we're going to see what this new array looks like. And as expected, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 high. So the two arrays have been combined together. However, if we just ran this concatenation and then we console logged our original array, as we can see, it has not in fact changed. Array2 has also not changed. So that's kind of what we are talking about whenever we say that it hasn't mutated that original array. So those arrays are exactly like we initially left them to. So unlike what we were doing with those mutator methods, shift, pop, push, reverse, those were changing those original arrays, whereas these are not being affected. There is one called includes. This one's a little bit tricky. So includes is actually has been implemented using ES6, which is a newer version of JavaScript. Unfortunately, my build does not include that newer version of ES6. It's actually using kind of the more standardized version that everybody else uses. So if I want to use includes, I actually have to grab something called a polyfill, which a polyfill is just this code that's essentially going to add the includes method to the array prototype. So you don't need to worry about kind of how that works, but so if I was going to see how includes works, I do includes here, and then I just want to figure out if a specific value is included within the array. So say I want to check if 2 is in there. So I'm just going to see, is it there? And then I run it. And in fact, it is there, true, as we expected. However, if I check if 7 is in there, it isn't false. So I think right now, if you guys were to try to run this in your build environment, you would not actually, I don't believe you would see this work with the includes, because I had to include this extra code here that's basically adding includes to the array prototype. So I got that from the Mozilla Developer Network. Mozilla Developer Network is a fantastic resource. So anytime that you have questions about how any of these array methods that we've gone over with how they work, your best bet is actually going to be go to the Mozilla Developer Network. If you just Google array slice JavaScript, I'm almost positive that the first hit you're going to find is to the Mozilla Developer Network. Any of those that you run are going to be there. And I think all of everything that we've covered and everything else that we're going to cover, that should be included if you were to try to run it in your build environment here in Sublime or Atom. I think this is the only one that is newer and has been added. Any questions kind of about how that works, or includes works, or the polyfill works?
I do. I want to mention a lot of browsers do have includes implemented already. So if you try to run includes, for instance, in the console of your browser, it's likely going to work. I know that it works in Chrome and Firefox in their current versions. I don't know about like Internet Explorer or Safari.
Good to know. Okay, so now we're going to jump on to join. So if we just look at join array. So we can see kind of what this looks like. So as you can see, it actually just adds everything together into a string and then puts a comma between those. So this is useful if you want to combine all of your elements together. That comma is just the default that's set up. I can pass in a parameter here. Say I want to join it with just an empty space. If I run that, you can see that there's a space between every one. If I just want to join all of those numbers together, or if I wanted to add in, let's just do and signs here. It's going to put an and sign between each of those numbers. You know, very, very useful in production software engineering. You need to add and signs between things. But seriously though, join is very useful. It is something that you will want to take advantage of. And as you can see, once again, this has not changed that original array. So that original array is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just here that we have the string. And if we do, just to show that, if we did type of join array, oh, I'm not sure why that's working like that. Oh, I can see, I didn't actually type of, I just typed type. So it is in fact a string now. It's no longer an array. All right, now we're going to jump on to Splice. Splice allows you to make a copy of the array. You can do the entire array or just a selected part. So here, if I just run an array slice without any parameters, I could see that it's in fact going to just give me the entire array. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I pass in a specific index, it's going to go to that index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, start there, and then remove the elements to the end of the array. However, you can also remove just a portion of it. So say I want to start at 2 and I want to remove up to, or I want to slice up to the 4th index. We're not actually removing it from the original array. So I can see here now that I have 0, 1, 2, and then I go to the 4th index there. Any questions about how Splice works? And just to be clear here, if we try to check our original array, it has not been modified, unlike Splice, which does modify the array. We also can do a toString off of our array. So again, it does not modify our array, but it does work kind of similar to just that default join parameter that we looked at earlier. It's just adding a comma in between each of the values and concatenating them into a single string. Say you wanted to find out at what index a specific value was within your array. So we'll look at index of 3. So we want to find out what that is. We can run array.indexOf. We'll pass in the value that we want to find. Index of 3. So if we run that, we can see that that's at the 2 index. If we change it to 4, as expected, it's going to return 3. So it's at that 3rd index. And then if we pass in a value that is not in the array, so 7, we try to find that, it's going to return -1. So a way that sometimes people, if they weren't using includes, they would try to find out if a value was in an array. They would say array.index of 7. If that equals -1, then we know that it's not in the array. That's not something you need to do if you're using includes, but it is something that you want to be aware of. Now say that we had multiple of the same value in this array, so we have 3 in there twice. And if I run array.index of 3, I'm still getting that it's at that second index. So there is another method called last index of, which works kind of as you would expect. It's going to, instead of starting at the beginning of the array and stopping when it finds the index, it's going to start at the end of the array and start looking for it there. So let's just run that. So here we can see now that the last index starting at the end is in fact 4, whereas if we were to run simply index of, you could see that it's at 2. If we added another 3 in here, oh, it's added at the beginning. So if we added another 3 in there, if we try to run this, index of is 0, and if we ran last index of here, the last index of is 4. So if we have something in between those, we'd have no way of finding that using index of or last index of. All right. So that's kind of a general rundown of how arrays work. I'm also just going to do one little quick thing here. I'm going to show you some cool things that you could maybe do with arrays. This is not too fancy, but we're just going to go over to that. So we're going to set up a counter variable here, and we're going to start it off at 0. And we're going to do a simple while loop, which we've done before. So while I is less than 10, we want to push our elements. We want to push the element of I into our array. So we're going to run array.push. We'll push in I. And then after that's completed, we're going to console log the elements in the array. Run it. Does not appear to be running for some reason. What have I done wrong? Oh, I didn't ever. Somebody catch what I did there? See if anyone can tell me what I didn't do. Good catch, yeah. Plus or equals 1. So we want to increment it, because at this point, it was just going to run indefinitely. Live coding is very easy, in case you were wondering. So here, we can see that every time it ran, we pushed to our array. So 1, 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When it gets to I equaling 10, it's actually no longer going to be added there. You could create a function to do the same thing. There's lots of different opportunities you could do to add things to that array. So that kind of covers sort of the basics of how arrays work. I did also really quick, just so we can see it demonstrated. So say we've got our array set up. And then we're also going to create an object here. So if I want to, first I'll do type of what that object is and run that. So it's an object as we expected. But then if we do type of array, as we can see, that's also an object. So there's nothing that's going to be different between object and array if we're just using type of. However, if we wanted to test that, we need to do array.isArray. And then we're going to pass in array. We run that. It's true for our array, but if we then passed in object and we ran that, we can see that it's false. So the object is not an array, even though it's an object, and the array is an array, but it's also an object. As far as John, the only reason I didn't use a for loop was because we've used while loops. I don't think did we specifically cover for loops yet? I don't think so, Sam.
I think that we're actually going to be getting into for loops today in the curriculum.
Cool. Do you want me to go ahead and demonstrate them, or just let them?
Yeah. Why don't we demonstrate it just in case people haven't seen a for loop before? So maybe we could take that while loop and then turn it into a for loop.
Excellent. Okay, so there was no specific reason why I didn't use a for loop. It was mainly just because of what you guys have been exposed to, which is why I used the while loop instead. So if you guys remember from, you probably don't because you've done so many other things since we went over those while loops a little while ago. But there was another kind of loop separate from the while loop or the do while loop called a for loop. So the for loop, you start off by setting up for here, just as far as the syntax, and then you'll set up your code block that you want to run inside of the for loop. Here, you actually are going to set up your variable for your counter, so variable I equals 0. Then you want to set how long you want your this loop to run for. So we want our loop to run until is less than or equal to 10. And then we also have to add what our incrementer is going to be, or it could be a decrementer, depending on our setup. But here, obviously, we want to increase so that our I is eventually going to be 10. So we'll just do I plus plus, or you could do I plus or equal 1, whichever is your preference. So that's the basic structure of how the for loop is going to work. You set up your variable here. This is your concatenation, and then after the loop is run, then this is going to increment it. So it's a similar structure, but it's all on one line here versus the while loop, which kind of had it separated out a little bit. And then once again, if I just do that array.push and I just push the current value of I, we can do that here. Console log what's in that array. So we can see now that there are 10 elements in the array. We're actually going to do something kind of interesting here. This is very common. So say I've pushed all of my elements into the array, and we now know that our current value of array is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I want to loop over each of those elements in the array, once again, I'll set up my initial variable. Since I've already used I, I'm going to use j. There's no specific reason why I used j over I. It's just, it's convention. Once you've set up your I, then you go to j, k. You just go through those letters of the alphabet. You don't generally get very far, but you just go through those next few. And then we want j to be less than, and this is an interesting part because our goal here is I want to console log out the value of each element in the array. So I want to console log out what the value at the j element of our array is. So what I have to do is I have to say, I want this loop to stop running when there is nothing left in the array, when I reach the end of it. So in order to do that, I can use the length property, which we talked about earlier. So array.length. It's interesting to note here that array.length is not a method that you would use. So we don't need to invoke it. It's simply a property that we can run like that, array.length. And then if I do j, I want to increment that each time that we go. I'll just do plus or equals 1, but you could just do plus plus. And then we will no longer console log out our value of array. But if we were to run this, we can see here that it does each loop 0, 1, 2, 3. And those are the values that are in the array, and it's console logging them as it goes, and then it stops when it gets to the end at 10. If I wanted to do array.length minus 5, so we know our array length value, and then if we do 5 and we ran that, the loop's actually not gonna, it's only gonna go to the 5th element now, or it's gonna go to the 6th element, which is the number 5. Any questions about the for loops or about arrays in general, or kind of what I just did there? All right, perfect. Well, if there are no other questions, I'll hand it over to Zian.
Hey, wait, I'm going to ask a question. When we're incrementing, can we increment by more than 1?
Absolutely. We could increment by 2, 3, or 500. 500 would not be useful, but that's a good question. No wonder he asked it. So cool. Here we've incremented by 2. So it goes 0, 2, 4. And then once you can see, it doesn't go, once it's the value of j is greater than the length. And then we can also just, for the sake of demonstration, I can leave that there actually. Say that we start off with our I value is 10, and then we want our I to be greater than or equal to negative 10. So here, we've set up our initial variable counter, I equals 10, and then I must be greater than or equal to negative 10. However, since we're starting at 10, if we keep adding to 10, we're just going to get 11, 12, 13, and we would never reach this condition. This condition here would always be true. I would always be greater than or equal to negative 10. So we need to actually subtract. So we could do minus minus if we wanted to just do 1. We'll just do 2 here. Minus equal 2. And then we're going to push it to the array. Here, we'll continually loop over the entire length of the array. So first off, we'll just show you what the array looks like after we run that loop. So here you can see we've counted down by negative 2, starting at 10, 10, 8, 6, as you expect. Goes down to negative 10. Once it reaches negative 10, since we gave it that condition, it's greater than or equal to negative 10. Once it reaches that condition, it stops running, quits pushing things into our array. As far as our loop goes here, if we want to console log the value of j, if we ran that, still works, starts off at 10 and counts down. And this is counting down over the values that are in our array. As far as what j is doing here, that's just the incrementer variable that I've set up. Like I said, we tend to use these letters just out of convention, but I can call this variable anything that I wanted to call it. So, I don't know, Skittles. Skittles are the best, right? If I wanted to call it Skittles here, it's just a variable. I run it. It's still going to work. It's exactly the same as what the I is here. If I tried to call this, in fact, I though, be a little, it would protest because we've already set up I up here before. So that's why we're using something different, because we want to have a different variable from the I. So we would want to use M. We could use anything here. Run that. It will still work. Any other questions about arrays or for loops here? That was a good question, by the way, Andy. Okay, well, I will go ahead and hand it over to Zan.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
So I understand that you can choose any letter instead of J, but I don't see how that second for loop is making any difference to the first one.
It's not interacting with this first for loop, right? So this first for loop that I've done, it's just adding things to the array.
Okay.
So I'll just close that out and I'll just put in the values here. Maybe this will be a little easier for a demonstration. So we've already got the values added into the array. And now it's just going to console log what the value of the array is at array M. So if we're incrementing by 1, it's just going to console log 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's all it's doing. It's just looping over that array. Is that a little bit more clear, Andy?
Yes, that's
yeah. And you can use for loops for lots of different things. We're just using them for arrays today because that's what we are simply going over. As far as what I was doing there when I was selecting the variables all at once, just a simple Sublime thing. If you hold Command and you click at multiple places at the same time, this is Command on a Mac. I don't know what the Windows one is. You can backspace, type in Zan is the best, and now we're going to increment by Zan is the best. And then if I wanted to delete each of those at once, if I hold Alt and backspace, this removes the entire word. That's all Alt backspace does. It's just remove the entire word. So a little Sublime quirk. There's a lot of fun shortcuts to learn. I would worry more about learning arrays and for loops, and then one day beefing up your Sublime shortcut game. Any other questions? All right, well, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Zan here.
Alrighty. I actually didn't know about that alt backspace thing. Just to show you, Sublime shortcut game is a big, deep game to master. So as the usual, you're going to break off into pairs. Try to pair with someone that you haven't paired with before. I think maybe at this point it might start to become a little bit difficult to do that since most people may have paired together. Also, one other thing. Today, I do want to note with arrays especially, don't feel like you have to come out of the day having all of the array methods memorized. No one has all of them memorized, and I think you'll find that for a long time, even the ones that you use commonly, you might have to go back and look at documentation and what different parts of the method does. Like slice, you can give the index a negative number. And even when I do that, I always go back to the documentation just to make sure that I know what's going to happen when I give that index a negative number. So definitely lean on the documentation and reference it often while you're working through the exercises today. Alrighty, I will let you all get to work.